Janine Giovanni is back with us, the Middle East editor with Newsweek, contributing editor with Vanity Fair, author of the book Ghosts by Daylight. Her website is digiovanni.com. Janine DiGiovanni. Janine, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks for joining us all the way from Paris, France. The Middle East is this whole situation seems to be getting more and more complex, particularly with what's going on in Yemen and Syria right now. What's your sense just of an overview of what's happening in the Middle East?
And Libya and Iraq and Lebanon and Jordan.
Yes.
There's a real process traveling in many ways. Well, for me, and there are people that would disagree, is a major divide between the Sunni and the Shia Muslims. And if we look at it globally in a big picture, we have the Shia giant Iran on one side and the Sunni giant Saudi on the other. And squished between them are various countries that are playing out wars, one of them being Iraq. Now, Yemen, which has been unraveling since 2011, but which we've been hearing more and more of in the past few weeks as the situation increasingly is deteriorating, the finger has been pointed at Iran for backing the Houthis. Now, the Houthis are Shias, about 20% of the population, a specific sect of Shias known as the Zaydis. And here's where it gets very complicated. And the Houthis are actually a civil rights movement. They're not a religious movement. Now, Iran has been blamed for meddling in Yemen, as well as meddling in Iraq, which is clearly true. But in the case of Yemen, actually, I have to look at how complicated the situation was already before. That the lack of infrastructure, the problems on the ground, the political infighting, President Saleh leaving in 2011 under great duress in the wake of the Arab Spring again, faced by his vice president, and then various things breaking down because of the intense poverty, because of the youth bulge. 60% of the population are under 25, because of the weak institutions. So we come to a point now where we have an absolute implosion in Yemen. And Iran, who have trained and sent instructors and have been important in some respect in what's happening there, are being blamed for it by Saudi, who've launched, of course, an airstrike. And if I haven't lost you by there, I could continue on to Iraq.
No, it's great. I get it. And I believe that Iran has been basically invited into Iraq. The first business that opened when Iraq sort of started recovering from our invasion was the Bank of Tehran, as I recall. But with regard to the Yazidis, the Houthis in Yemen, I don't know that situation and to what extent they may be supportive of them. Iran might be supportive of them. But if this is a regional, basically proxy war going on between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between a Shiite superpower, and a Sunni superpower.
It is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it, to me, is the unraveling of old colonial borders that were drawn in the wake of World War I that were artificial. I mean, in many ways, like looking at the former Yugoslavia, which was not really a state. It was something that was created in the wake and the destruction of World War I. Right. The same thing happened with places like Iraq, Syria, which were carved French, British diplomats, basically, who sat down with a pen and paper and drew a map of Iraq. Now, Iraq, as we know, has three main groups: the Shias, the Sunnis, the Kurds. Their lines were drawn basically by a British diplomat called Gertrude Bell. And that is what they lived with, and they were held together in many ways by a strongman like Saddam Hussein, in the same way that in the former Yugoslavia, Tito held people together. Right. And once they were gone, the ethnic tensions rose. But what's happening in Iraq right now is really that Iran was more or less invited after ISIS overran Mosul on June the 10th, Iraq was looking for help, and they more or less turned to America, which said, we're not getting involved in this anymore. And Iran saw a golden opportunity to come in, to begin training, to begin giving weapons. There were jets on the ground a few days after Mosul fell. And what do we have now? We have basically the Iraqi army, the Iranians doing most of the fighting. A lot of people would disagree with me on that, but they're really having some stunning victories. That doesn't make the Sunnis happy at all. It makes them very concerned. So we've really got a situation now where Iran is getting more and more involved in various countries where they see Shia minorities, or in the case of Iraq, majorities.
So back to the question I was sort of into just a minute ago is, if we have a couple of regional superpowers, Saudi Arabia and maybe on their side some of the other Emirates in the Gulf, very wealthy oil states, Bahrain, UAE, Dubai, Qatar, and then on the other hand you've got the Shiite empire, Iran, the superpower of Iran. If what's going on in the region at some major consequential level is a proxy war between these two, what is the United States doing in the middle of this? And how should this, and for that matter, the rest of the world, I mean, you got European forces in there too, and how should we appropriately be dealing with this? I mean, when Yugoslavia disintegrated, it led to the war, the Bosnian Serbian war with millions of refugees and tens of thousands of dead people, and Slobodan Milosevic.
We did not get involved for many years until 1995, essentially, and the war started there in 1992. So, this is a very good question, and one can see it in one respect, which is that America has come very late into this crisis. On one hand, there is the Iranian negotiations going on now about the nuclear deal. So, if we're going to look at that as two separate entities from what's happening in, say, Syria, Iran, as we know, is a big backer of President Assad, a big supporter, along with Russia and China. They have sent their troops, they've sent soldiers in the guise of Hezbollah, who are their, who they fund in, not just in Iraq, where there's also Hezbollah in Iraq, but in Syria.
Right. Janine, if I may interrupt, we just have a minute left. I'm sorry, until the break. Could this end up, I mean, Iran is allied with China and Russia. Could this end up like World War I, where this regional conflict becomes an international?
I think it already is an international conflict. I mean, if you look at the Security Council, every time a vote comes up on Syria, it's blocked by Russia, by China, who are allies of Syria, right, and aligned with Iran. I hope to God it doesn't come to a World War I scenario. But I mean, I think you can very much already see it. If you actually make a diagram, you could line up the countries, who's behind who's behind, who's behind Saudi, who's behind the rebels, the Syrian rebels, who's behind the who's supporting Assad. I mean, it's a very kind of clear
and it all goes back to the superpowers, to the United States, China, and Russia.
Yes.
Wow, amazing stuff. Janine DiGiovanni, the Middle East editor with Newsweek, contributing editor with Vanity Fair, author of the book Ghosts by Daylight. Links to that, all of that, over at our website. JanineDiGiovanni.com is the website. Janine, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.